Let me tell you something that absolutely blindsided the entire wrestling world this past weekend, something so unexpected, so genuinely shocking, so completely out of left field that even the most seasoned veterans in this industry couldn't have predicted it coming. Paul Heyman, the man who has been orchestrating the Vision's every single move for months, the mastermind behind one of the most dominant factions in WWE history, the strategic genius who built his career on loyalty and calculated alliances, just ripped the heart straight out of his own group by betraying them completely and aligning himself with Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble. Welcome to the channel, where we dissect the moments that redefine professional wrestling, and I promise you that by the time we finish breaking down everything that happened, you're going to understand exactly why this particular betrayal has the entire locker room scrambling, why the fanbase is split right down the middle, and why this single decision by Paul Heyman just fundamentally altered the power structure of WWE for what could easily be the next several months. The Royal Rumble was already shaping up to be one of the most chaotic and unpredictable events of the year before we even got to the moment that changed everything. The Vision had been absolutely dominant leading into the show, controlling storylines, manipulating match outcomes, positioning their members as the unstoppable force that everyone else on the roster needed to collectively figure out how to deal with. And sitting right in the middle of all that chaos, pulling every string, making every strategic decision, was Paul Heyman. The man who turned professional wrestling into an art form of psychological manipulation, who elevated the concept of an advocate from simple accompaniment to an entirely different dimension of storytelling, who has managed to remain at the top of the food chain regardless of which wrestler he aligns himself with because he's universally acknowledged as the smartest person in any room he walks into. I was watching the Royal Rumble with my neighbor Eddie, who's been a wrestling fan for about 15 years but openly admits he barely has the patience for multi-month storylines. He was specifically watching because he wanted to see how the Vision's dominance would continue, wanted to see if WWE would finally give them some kind of meaningful challenge, wanted to see if anyone on the roster could actually stand up to the most organized and calculated faction in company history. Eddie had his money on the Vision maintaining complete control through the entire event, and honestly I couldn't really blame him because nothing in the weeks leading up to the Royal Rumble suggested otherwise. The build-up had been flawless, the execution had been meticulously planned, and Heyman had been conducting the whole orchestra with the kind of precision that only he can deliver. The early portion of the Royal Rumble match itself went almost exactly according to the Vision's carefully laid out blueprint. Their members entered at strategically chosen numbers, they executed their coordinated eliminations with surgical precision, and Heyman was standing ringside looking exactly like a general watching his army conquer territory without breaking a sweat. Everything was working. Everything felt inevitable. The crowd was getting increasingly frustrated with the Vision's dominance, which is exactly where you want the audience psychologically if you're building toward a satisfying payoff somewhere down the road. Paul Heyman had clearly thought about every possible variable, had contingency plans for contingency plans, had mapped out every single conceivable outcome weeks in advance. Then Roman Reigns' entrance music hit. Now let me put this in proper context for anyone who might not be fully caught up on the current landscape of WWE storylines. Roman Reigns returning at this particular moment was unexpected on its own, given that he had been away from the product for a significant stretch of time dealing with various personal matters. But the real shock wasn't Roman's entrance, it was what happened approximately 45 seconds after he stepped through that curtain. My living room went completely silent as Roman walked down that ramp, and Eddie literally paused his mid-sentence commentary about how the Vision was going to easily handle any opposition because something about the atmosphere in the arena shifted in a way that nobody could quite explain but absolutely everyone could feel. Roman gets in the ring, and immediately the Vision members start their coordinated attack, moving with that same precision and timing that had been their signature throughout the entire build-up to this moment. Roman weathers the initial assault, starts fighting back with the devastating power that reminds everyone exactly why he was considered the top guy for years. The crowd is getting behind him, the energy is building, and Paul Heyman is pacing ringside looking slightly less composed than his usual perfectly calculated demeanor. You could see him making real-time adjustments, barking instructions, trying to maintain that strategic advantage that had been untouchable for so long. Everything still seemed like it was going to end with the Vision prevailing because that's what the story had been telling us week after week after week. And then Paul Heyman stopped pacing. He just stopped, right there on the apron, and looked directly at Roman Reigns with this expression that immediately made every wrestling fan watching simultaneously go, "Wait, no, that can't be happening right now." Eddie turned to me with his mouth literally open because even someone who doesn't obsess over wrestling psychology recognized that the body language had just changed in a fundamental way. Heyman reached up, slowly pulled off his headset, set it down carefully on the ring post, and walked directly toward Roman Reigns while the Vision members were still attacking him. The faction members noticed immediately that their architect had stopped orchestrating, that their strategist had gone completely silent, that the man who had been pulling every single lever for months was standing in the exact center of the ring doing absolutely nothing. Roman catches one of the Vision's bigger members with a devastating spear that puts him completely out of the fight. He turns his attention to the others and starts dismantling them one by one with that brutal efficiency that only someone with his combination of size, speed, and ring experience can deliver. And through all of this carnage, through all of this destruction, Paul Heyman is standing right there, not intervening, not orchestrating escapes, not directing the traffic the way he had been doing for months. The Vision's leader looks at Heyman with genuine confusion, with betrayal already registering in his expression because the smart money just disconnected from the faction without a single word of explanation. Then Heyman does something that I have been replaying in my head over and over since it happened. He walks up behind Roman, and instead of attacking him, instead of trying to redirect the chaos toward any kind of favorable outcome for the Vision, he leans in close to Roman's ear and whispers something. We can't hear what he said because the arena noise is completely drowning everything out, but whatever those words were, Roman's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders dropped slightly, his jaw tightened, and he turned to look at Heyman with this expression of absolute trust that the entire wrestling world immediately recognized because we'd seen it before during their legendary partnership. My buddy Mike, who I'd been texting throughout the event, literally sent me a string of messages in rapid succession that were nothing but capital letters and exclamation points because he was watching simultaneously and couldn't believe what was unfolding in front of his eyes. Paul Heyman, the man who had devoted months of his life and all of his considerable intellectual energy to building the Vision into an unstoppable machine, was abandoning them completely and seemingly without hesitation, without guilt, without any visible sign of internal conflict. This wasn't a gradual shift, wasn't a slow betrayal that built over several episodes, it was a sudden, clean, brutal amputation of the relationship between Heyman and everything he had constructed. The remaining Vision members tried to mount a resistance, tried to rally and force Heyman to explain himself or defend his decision, but Roman was already in full demolition mode. One gets hit with a rock bottom that bounces him halfway across the ring. Another catches a devastating kick that sends him tumbling over the top rope and out of the match entirely. The third one charges directly at Roman and gets absolutely obliterated with a spear so vicious that the impact echoes throughout the entire stadium. Within maybe 90 seconds, every single member of the Vision who is still in the ring has been eliminated, and it's just Roman and Heyman standing there together in the center of the ring while the crowd is creating a noise level that honestly felt like the building itself might not be able to contain it. Eddie just sat there on his couch completely speechless for what felt like an eternity after it happened. He's not someone who gets emotionally invested in wrestling storylines the way hardcore fans do, but even he understood the magnitude of what we had just witnessed. Paul Heyman betraying his own faction isn't just a storyline development, it's a fundamental shift in how we understand his character, his motivations, and his long-term strategy. Because here's the thing that separates Paul Heyman from every other manager, every other advocate, every other non-wrestling performer in this business: he doesn't make decisions impulsively. Every single move he makes has layers of calculation behind it, has been thought through from multiple angles, has a purpose that extends far beyond the immediate moment. I've been following Heyman's career for the better part of 2 decades, from his days running ECW where he essentially invented a new style of professional wrestling entertainment, through his management of Brock Lesnar which elevated both men to heights they might not have reached individually, through his current position as what is arguably the most important non-wrestler in WWE. I remember watching him manage The Shield, remember seeing him build Roman Reigns into the most dominant force in modern wrestling, remember studying every single promo and every single strategic decision he made during Roman's legendary championship reign. Through all of those different eras and partnerships, one thing remained constant: Heyman always had a bigger picture in mind, always was operating 3 steps ahead of everyone else, always had a reason for every single action that only became apparent once enough time had passed for the full plan to reveal itself. So when I watched him betray the Vision at the Royal Rumble, my immediate thought wasn't outrage or confusion but rather pure fascination about what his actual endgame is here. Because Paul Heyman doesn't abandon things without a reason. He doesn't burn bridges for the sake of burning them. He doesn't make moves that appear random or impulsive because his entire brand is built on the concept of calculated, intelligent decision-making. Whatever the Vision represented, whatever purpose they served in his larger strategy, they apparently reached a point where they became more liability than asset, more obstacle than tool, and Heyman made the cold, surgical decision to cut them loose because Roman Reigns offered a superior path toward whatever his ultimate objective actually is. The backstage dynamics following the Royal Rumble have been absolutely fascinating to try to piece together from the various reports that have been trickling out over the past several days. Sources indicate that the Vision members were genuinely shocked, that they had no advance knowledge of Heyman's planned departure from the group, that they were operating under the assumption that their partnership with the Advocate was going to continue indefinitely. One particularly credible report suggests that the confrontation between Heyman and the Vision's leader backstage after the match was intense enough that security had to intervene and keep the two parties separated until emotions had cooled down sufficiently. My sister, who works in corporate communications and has no real knowledge of professional wrestling, actually brought up an interesting point when I was explaining the situation to her over coffee the following morning. She compared Heyman's move to what happens in high-level corporate restructuring, where executives form strategic alliances that serve specific business purposes and dissolve those alliances without hesitation the moment they no longer serve the company's evolving objectives. From that perspective, Heyman isn't betraying anyone in any meaningful sense because his loyalty was never to the Vision specifically, it was to his own interests and to the achievement of his own goals, and Roman Reigns simply represents a more effective vehicle for achieving those goals than the collective he had been running. That analysis actually tracks perfectly with Heyman's documented history in this business. He's worked with Brock Lesnar multiple times, left, came back, adjusted his relationship with Brock based on changing circumstances without any apparent hesitation or guilt. He's been associated with various factions and groups throughout his career, always positioning himself as the architect rather than a member, always maintaining enough emotional distance from his creations that he can walk away from them when the situation demands it. Paul Heyman is perhaps the only person in wrestling history who has consistently demonstrated the ability to be genuinely loyal to absolutely nobody except himself while still being universally respected and even admired for his brilliance. The Roman Reigns reunion adds another fascinating dimension to an already complex situation because their previous partnership produced some of the best professional wrestling storytelling we've seen in recent memory. Roman's championship reign with Heyman as his advocate was a masterclass in character development, promos that actually made you believe Roman was the most dangerous person on the planet, strategic thinking that kept the title around Roman's waist for an unprecedented amount of time. That era reminded everyone exactly why Roman Reigns is capable of being the absolute top guy in this industry when given the right supporting structure and the right creative direction. The fact that Heyman is choosing to return to that partnership suggests he sees the potential to recreate or even exceed what they accomplished together previously. I remember sitting in the crowd at SummerSlam a few years back when Roman and Heyman were at the peak of their dominance together, and the energy in that building was unlike anything I'd experienced in my years of attending live wrestling events. Roman was genuinely despised by the audience, but in that perfect way where you couldn't look away, couldn't stop watching, couldn't deny that every single thing he was doing was captivating regardless of how you felt about him personally. That kind of reaction doesn't happen by accident, it requires incredible in-ring ability from the performer and absolutely flawless strategic guidance from the advisor. Heyman provided that guidance perfectly, reading the crowd, adjusting the narrative in real time, ensuring that Roman always felt like a genuine threat to whoever he was aligned against. The implications for the rest of the WWE roster are enormous and honestly somewhat terrifying to think about. Roman Reigns with Paul Heyman orchestrating his strategy was previously one of the most difficult obstacles for anyone to overcome, and now that combination is back together at a time when Roman is returning from an extended absence with what many observers believe is a personal vendetta driving his motivation. The Vision's members have suddenly found themselves without their most important strategic asset and face the double threat of Roman's physical dominance and Heyman's intellectual superiority simultaneously working against them. Every champion, every contender, every wrestler with any kind of ambition toward the main event picture just had to fundamentally reassess their long-term game plans. The social media response in the 48 hours following the Royal Rumble has been staggering in its scale and intensity. Wrestling fans are passionately divided between those who see Heyman's move as brilliant and those who view it as an unforgivable betrayal of the trust the Vision had placed in him. The former camp is highlighting historical precedents, pointing to Heyman's track record of making bold moves that initially appear questionable but ultimately prove to be strategic genius once more context is revealed. The latter camp is focused on the emotional betrayal, on the idea that Heyman had a responsibility to his group that he callously abandoned, on the fact that the Vision members literally restructured their entire careers around Heyman's leadership. What's particularly interesting from a pure storytelling perspective is how this development immediately creates multiple compelling threads for WWE to pull on over the coming weeks and months. The Vision has to respond to this betrayal in some way that's dramatic enough to justify ongoing television time. Roman has to justify his return and establish why he needs Heyman specifically rather than simply dominating on his own. Heyman himself has to address the elephant in the room, has to explain or at least hint at his reasoning in a way that generates more questions than answers and keeps the audience invested and engaged. Each of these threads individually could sustain weeks of quality television, and when you combine them all together, you have the foundation for one of the most compelling multi-layered storylines WWE has constructed in quite some time. The corporate strategy behind this decision is also worth examining because WWE under its current management has been making increasingly bold creative choices that sometimes feel jarring in the moment but ultimately serve the larger brand narrative. Having Heyman be the guy who tears the Vision apart from the inside creates legitimate drama, creates genuine emotional stakes, creates a villain turn that feels earned based on everything we know about his character rather than feeling like a random creative decision imposed from above. It also positions Roman's return as a major event-level story rather than just another superstar coming back from injury or absence, which justifies the level of promotion and attention WWE is devoting to this particular development. My friend Patricia, who teaches psychology at the local university and has a genuine academic interest in how storytelling creates emotional responses, actually asked me to explain the Heyman situation to her after seeing clips trending on various platforms. When I broke down the history and the implications, she pointed out that Heyman's move represents what psychologists call strategic self-interest being prioritized over social obligation, and that audiences respond so strongly to these kinds of betrayals because they trigger the same emotional pathways activated by real-life experiences of being let down by someone trusted. That framing actually helps explain why this moment generated such an enormous reaction, why people felt genuinely angry at a fictional development, why the comment sections across every platform have been so heated and passionate. The championship landscape in WWE is about to shift dramatically because of everything that happened at the Royal Rumble. Roman's return combined with Heyman's tactical guidance means that whoever is currently holding gold is essentially on borrowed time, and the question isn't really if Roman is going to target a title but rather which specific belt he goes after first and how quickly the pursuit begins. Wrestling promotions need clear primary targets and motivations for their biggest stars, and Roman with Heyman pulling strings provides exactly that kind of focused narrative direction that drives television ratings, pay-per-view buys, and overall audience engagement toward a clearly defined destination. I've been covering professional wrestling for long enough to recognize the difference between a development that generates temporary buzz and a development that actually reshapes the fundamental dynamics of the product for an extended period. The latter is significantly rarer, significantly more difficult to execute effectively, and significantly more rewarding when it actually works the way it's supposed to. Paul Heyman betraying the vision and joining Roman Reigns falls squarely into that second category because it doesn't just create a short-term talking point, it establishes an entirely new power dynamic, creates fresh conflicts with existing storylines, validates Roman's return as a genuinely significant event, and gives the vision an existential crisis that demands a dramatic response. The merchandise angle deserves mention as well because the business implications extend far beyond just the wrestling product itself. Roman Reigns' merchandise has historically been some of WWE's best-selling product, and pairing him with Heyman again creates natural merchandising opportunities that weren't available when they were working in separate storyline contexts. T-shirt designs featuring the Roman and Heyman partnership, limited edition items that celebrate the reunion, social media exclusive merchandise tied to specific moments as this story develops, all of these revenue streams have suddenly reopened in ways that the company's merchandising division has almost certainly already started exploiting. The final thing I want to emphasize before we wrap up this particular breakdown is that Paul Heyman is a generational talent in a role that most people don't fully appreciate until they see it executed at the absolute highest level. What he did at the Royal Rumble wasn't just a storyline decision, it was a masterful performance that demonstrated why he remains the most important non-wrestler in professional wrestling. The timing of the betrayal, the way he physically positioned himself as the action unfolded, the subtle signals he gave Roman that told the audience everything they needed to know without a single word being spoken, the complete lack of hesitation or visible remorse as he walked away from everything he built with the vision, all of it showcased a performer operating at a level that few people in this business will ever reach regardless of how long they spend studying the craft. So here's what I need from each and every one of you right now. Get in those comments immediately and let me know your actual honest take on whether Paul Heyman made a brilliant strategic move or whether this was the worst decision he's made in his entire career. Is this the beginning of the greatest Roman Reigns run we've ever seen? Did the vision deserve better from their own architect? Do you think Heyman has something even bigger planned that we're not seeing yet? Those questions are why this community exists, those debates are what keep WWE Frenzy alive and growing, and your voices genuinely shape the content we create moving forward. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already because we are covering every single piece of fallout from this Royal Rumble situation as it develops, tracking every response from the vision, documenting every step of Roman's return journey. Smash that notification bell because in a story this volatile and this unpredictable, major developments could drop at literally any moment and we don't want you missing a single detail. Share this video with everyone you know who follows professional wrestling, everyone who appreciates genuinely surprising storytelling, everyone who wants to understand why the Royal Rumble just became one of the most talked about wrestling events in recent memory. This story is barely beginning, and WWE Frenzy is going to be right here documenting every single twist, every single turn, every single moment until this saga reaches its conclusion.